Good morning, everyone. I'm Dr. Dominique Berdrained, and I and my colleague, Ms. Davlin Hill, are really happy to be here with you all today to really talk about village building and mental health advocacy. Um, I am out of an office here in South Carolina, Simpsonville, South Carolina, with Virgine's Healing Services. And Davlin and myself are colleagues. We work together at Virgine's Healing Services. And once again, we are honored to have this opportunity to be here to discuss village building and its impact and importance with mental health advocacy. So in our line of work, what we like to do is really help people we like to set a container for how we're going to be in this space together, even though it's virtual. I do think it's important for us to do that. So we'd like to share some community agreements with you of how we would like to be in this space with you today. So we would like for us all to agree to be present, kind, with one another. And when we say present, we mean a lot of things can be distracting to us sometimes. So while we're physically present for today's webinar, sometimes our mind may be elsewhere. We might have a to-do list that we have to do, have a lunch meeting we have to get to, or something of the sort, or we're worried about. We really want you to be intentional on being in the moment with us in this webinar. We do ask you to be kind to yourself, as well as kind to us and what you're going to hear in this space. We ask that you be open to hearing something that may be different than what you've heard before. Sometimes things you may not even agree with, but being open to just receiving that information and then processing it. We want to share this space equitably. This is something that we normally do when we're having more dialogue. We won't be having as much today because it's a webinar, but sometimes it's hard for us to, for some of us who maybe attention span might be a little bit more shorter than others. So we always want to make sure that we're mindful of that when we're sharing information. We want to show up in our authentic selves. Very important to just, really be who you are in this space. And then we also ask that you be brave. Sometimes there may be questions that you want to ask that you're not quite clear on how to ask. Sometimes we worry about having it said just right or being perfect. And we know that there's no such thing as perfection. So this is why it's so important that we ask people to be brave. And so in the course of this webinar, you might hear something that may be alarming or triggering for you. We do ask that you attend to your needs and take care of yourself, because we don't know what that could be, but we want to make sure that that we honor that and we respect that and ask people to do what they need to do for themselves throughout the course of this webinar. So once again, thank you for joining us today.
Thanks, Dominique. I think it's also good to remember when we are doing this webinar, we are in a relationship together presenting this. And so we get to act out those community agreements with each other in this space. So just in order for us to know where we're going today, we like to give some objectives. We're going to give a welcome and then introduce ourselves. Then we're going to define or develop some shared language around village building, what it's comprised of when we consider mental health. And then we're going to discuss village building and how we use it to care for one another while we're waiting for mental health services because of the shortage of competent therapists. Specifically, we'll be talking some about Black therapists and competent clinicians. And then lastly, to demonstrate historical analysis for the way people of color have survived mental health issues through kinship building. We want to highlight this because oftentimes Indigenous folks and practices aren't brought into the forefront, but we can all learn from them. And so we wanted to make sure to center those voices. And in order to do that today, we want to just acknowledge where we are in upstate South Carolina on the land of the Cherokee, the Catawba, excuse me, the Edisto here was for hunting, as well as many Indigenous folks lived on this land. Native folks lived here and currently still do, though they were displaced because of forced migration, murder, disease, just white supremacy, wiping out millions of them. Many of them remain here and a part of our daily lives and even a part of some of our heritage. And so we just wanted to kind of take a moment, even though we're in this digital space, to realize and say the thing that we are allowed to do this because we have land, and that land, the idea of belonging versus ownership is something that's very meaningful to us. And so just wanted to take a moment to acknowledge that. So we want to just give us a brief introduction about who we are. I'm Davelin, and I'm a master's in marriage and family therapy, as well as a MFA in poetry. And I enjoy talking with people about how to make the world a more equitable place and how we get there through collective liberation. And because I really believe that none of us is free until we're all free. And so just at the beginning of Pride Month, I also just want to say Happy Pride, and that part of the work for freedom is ongoing as well. And so how can we work together is like on my mind constantly with all of the assaults that are happening all over this country against so many of us who live at the margins.
Thank you, Davelin. Yes, I am Dr. Dominique Vidrine, and I am a licensed marriage and family therapist. And I, in addition to being a therapist, I am a mother, I'm a lover, I am a daughter, I'm a friend. And I think my experiences as a Haitian American Black woman, moving from the North to the South, has really helped me to understand how important it is for us to really be intentional about taking care of self, but also valuing everyone. Just like you stated earlier, Davelin, about paying attention to people in the margins, I do believe if we as a society could attend to making sure that all of us have access to the resources that we need, specifically those who are marginalized by our society, I do believe we would be in a better position. And so my hope is to continually work on helping us, my village and the community at large, to understand the importance of intentionally valuing everyone, recognizing that your value is inherent, right? There's nothing that you can do to take away from that or add on to that, even though our society tells us otherwise, thinking that what you achieve, your achievements or what you do, that's what's going to make you valuable. No, you're just valuable because you are human. And so that's a little bit about me. So once again, welcome. So I want to take a moment and just delve right in. Due to time purposes, we're just going to go through it pretty quickly. And this won't be very comprehensive, but we will want to share some keynotes about what we think with regards to village building and mental health advocacy. So we like to make sure that we're all on the same page of the same book with regards to what we mean when we talk about village building. So what we mean by village building, it's a connected community of caring individuals comprised of adults, friends, neighbors, extended family members, doulas, physicians, coworkers, teachers, clergy, acquaintances, etc., who support each other in nurturing relationship that enables means to attend to each other's needs, right? Whether those needs are emotional, physical, economical, relational, spiritual, or mental, right? Members of the village are not just recipients of said support, but full participants offering care and support to others, right? So that's really what we're talking about when we're talking about village building. And then mental health, what we mean by mental health, according to the CDC, the Center for Disease Control, and mentalhealth.gov, mental includes our emotional, psychological, and social well-being, right? Our mental health, that's what that's referring to. It affects how we think, feel, and act. It also helps determine how we handle stress, relate to others, and make choices. Mental health is important at every stage of our lives, from childhood, adolescence, and then through adulthood. Biological factors such as genes or brain chemistry, life experiences, and family history are also factors that contribute to our mental health and well-being.
So why does village building even matter? Why does it matter for us to consider village building alongside mental health and advocacy? How do they work together? I think as we were looking at those two definitions, something that stands out is that it's about connection. I'm connected to people, which then connect me to systems, and whether there's barriers or openness kind of depends on the level of connection, the strength of it, the health. And so without connection, there's isolation. And outside of connection, isolation can do so many things for us against our mental health. And so we want to kind of just start with that, just to think about, what does it mean when we don't have connection?
Yes, Davlin. What does it mean when we don't have connection? So I'd like to talk about some of the impacts of when we're not able to have connection. And I think I saw an increase of this with regards to us going through the pandemic, COVID-19. The impacts of social isolation leads to experiencing increased depression, depressive symptoms, an increase of anxiety. Sometimes it can increase low self-esteem because we're connected with other people, or when we don't have that connection, we don't have that ability to understand self as well sometimes. So that makes it challenging because we understand ourselves in relation to others, right? Sleep deprivation happens as well. We've also noticed, research has shown that social isolation also increases weakened immune system, right? And there's like reduced cognitive skills, right? Which entails sometimes there could be difficulty problem solving. There could be difficulty with being able to concentrate. So you might see like a decrease in your ability to concentrate and to make decisions. And sometimes with social isolation, we can engage in negative self-talk. And with social isolation, I also want to share, just like our self-esteem, oftentimes the way in which we understand ourselves is in connection to others, brain development is in connection to others. So we know neuroscientists have really shared with us that a baby's brain develops in direct connection to the primary caregiver's brain. Right. So just imagine if we don't, when that person doesn't have, when that baby does not have that connection or stimulation from another primary caregiver, a human being, that social isolation also limits the development of their human brain. So it's really important for us to recognize how significant the impact of social isolation is. So this is just some information that we also wanted to share, and this is from Kaiser Family Foundation, the Economist survey on loneliness and social isolation in the United States, in the United Kingdom, as well as in Japan. And this was conducted a couple years ago in 2018. And so it looked at, many people, many of the participants say loneliness has had a negative impact on their relationships, their mental as well as physical health. Right? So if you look, you see it's an alarming rate how loneliness has had such an impact. And this is before the pandemic, right? Because this was done in 2018, right? So we want to be very mindful to recognize like this is pretty serious. It impacts your mental health, your physical health, your personal relationships, and your ability to do your job at an alarming rate. So 58% of the people who took the survey in the United States stated how impactful it was in a negative way for them to, on their mental health when they were lonely, when they experienced loneliness. 60% of the population that was surveyed in the United Kingdom stated that impact had a negative impact on their mental health. And then 75% of the population surveyed in Japan stated that loneliness had a negative impact on their mental well-being. So it's really important for us to pay attention to. And then we want to look at the high cost of loneliness and social isolation, right? The negative effects are high and may increase as Americans work remotely or distance themselves once they return to the workplace, right? So 1 in 5 Americans, 1 in 5 individuals were saying they always or often feel lonely or socially isolated. 3 in 10 millennials always or often feel lonely, right? Those reporting loneliness or social isolation also report being dissatisfied with, other aspects of their lives, right? Most notably around their personal finances, employment, and housing. So these are really alarming, and these are so important for us to pay attention to once again, because these are all things that we need in our lives, right? Personal finances, employment, housing, it's going to impact our quality of life.
Mute button got away from me. When we think about the impact, it's easy to kind of look at stats and think, oh, this is outside of me. But what happens when I bring it inside and think, how have I been impacted by social isolation and or loneliness? Excuse me. Maybe take a moment just to think through that. You know, did those stats ring true for you personally? Right? We can look at things in a qualitative way, but like quantitatively, if you were to think about yourself, people around you, the people you're connected to, how has social isolation and loneliness impacted you or them? And so we want to just kind of I'm going to tell parts of my personal story just throughout this webinar, just to give a little bit of a personal context to the data. And so when I think about isolation, social isolation and loneliness, growing up and experiencing some measure of trauma, and then having a relationship with my primary caregiver that was inconsistent at times, created an inability to me to form really close social bonds. And so I experienced lots of loneliness and social isolation, lots of time in my room with the door closed reading. Reading is fantastic. So let's not say that, but every time, where's Davlin? She's in a book. Where she's in her room in a book, instead of using the opportunity to, go to the library and like spend time with people reading books. Let's try that at first. And so what I started to see in myself were some of those symptoms. Saw some depression, so the low self-esteem, anxiety, just some of the things that get strengthened when we have healthy social bonds were not there for me. And so that's how I was impacted by social isolation and loneliness and not knowing how. It's like, how do you, if you don't learn from a primary caregiver and start to do that in school, and then there's bullying and all the stuff that happens there, who teaches you how to form those social bonds? And so then loneliness becomes just a state of being, and like have the desire for connection, but not knowing how to do it, and all that can wreak havoc on our mental health. And so I want to talk about how does loneliness feel? And so we have a poet here. His name is Rudy Francisco. He's one of the top spoken word artists in the country for the last, decade. He's been on Verses and Flow and has won several slam championships, as well as written a couple of books as well. And so this poem, I just want to give you like content that it could be about depression. And so if you're, that content is a little shaky for you, just want you to take care of yourself as we start this video.
During the winter of 2015, the residents of Hampton Bay, Long Island woke up to what they say was the worst smell they had ever experienced. Mysteriously, overnight, 1,000 fish had died in the canal. After thorough analysis, they found that the oxygen levels in the water were too low and all the fish had drowned. Upon hearing the news, many had questions like, how does a fish drown? Don't they have gills? Don't they have a fin and a tail? They said things like, aren't they built to survive in that environment? Perhaps this is the best analogy for my depression. This angry deity, this jealous God, this thirsty shadow that wrings my joy like a dish rag, turns every conversation into a conveyor belt that always begins with the phrase, you look tired today. To be honest, getting out of bed has become a magic trick, and I'm probably the worst magician I know. This sadness is the only clean shirt I have left, and my washing machine has been broken for months. When people ask me how I'm doing, I want to say my daughter's 4 years old and I'm still not sure if I'm a good father. I want to say that my dad is being diagnosed with dementia. There might be a day when I walk in the room and he doesn't recognize me, and I've always wanted us to start all over, but I guess you got to be careful about what you ask for. I guess when you pray for something, you have to be a little more specific. I want to say crickets have been known to eat their own wings, and I too have a tendency to destroy what helps me get off the ground. I really want to say that I'm not in a good place right now, but that's not a polite answer. So instead, I pretend it's Halloween. I jack-o'-lantern my face into something acceptable, and I tell others I'm fine until it sounds like the truth. But sometimes there's a help me chain to the ankle of an I'm doing okay. Sometimes I'm fine is the quickest way to say I don't want to talk about it. Sometimes all the oxygen in the room becomes water. I feel like I'm sinking to the bottom, like I'm running out of air. But I made a promise to myself that I won't be another drowning fish, that I will not die in this canal. I heard that if you just take a deep breath and relax, the human body will naturally float on top of the water. So I breathe and I tell myself that it's going to be okay. I cry, but I tell myself that it's going to be okay. It's going to be okay. It's going to be okay, because I know there is a better version of me somewhere in the future. He is staring at this moment right here, and he is saying, Rudy, thank you for not giving up on us. A few days ago, I was reading, and I saw a run-on sentence, and I thought, it could have just ended right there. But it found a reason to keep going. I smiled and I said, well, same.
Just take a moment to, breathe. And how does loneliness feel? This is one example. How does it feel to you? And if you were to say where you feel in your body this moment after this poem, where do you feel it? Or are you aware of your body? Have you been able to connect? Something about connection, that when we connect to others, it also allows us to connect better to our own body, our mind, our ideas, or all of that, because we can feel what connection means for us physically.
Yes, definitely. Every time I hear this poem, it's like I feel it in my stomach. To hear him say, the way in which he described when people ask how he's feeling.
Yes.
Never knowing all that stuff is behind that when he says, I'm fine. Right. And just imagining, wow, that's a lot. That's a lot. And just thinking how many people have had similar experiences of loneliness, or loneliness manifesting itself in different ways. Too. And so, yeah, I really appreciated that pause, having to be able to take a pause to breathe, because, I really appreciated it, but it's important to take that time. But for me, just to answer your question, I felt it in my stomach, my abdomen.
I agree. I also felt the kind of clenching, because how many times, most of us are familiar with the I'm okay response when you're really not okay. It's like, oh, are you okay? How are you doing? I'm okay. Really? Yeah. Given all the information on our faces says I'm not okay, but I don't want to talk about it. Or, there's so much I can't talk about it because it's like, we'll tumble down. But I think he also gave some ideas of things to do, right? Said, I breathe, I cry, I, tell myself that I'm going to be okay. All of that stuff is, all of those are coping skills for when we get to that space. And so I appreciated him putting those in there in a way that's creative. So we're like, oh, I think I learned some things. I could breathe, space things out, take time to cry. I can write about it, share it in a poem, or share with other people. So yeah, I love creativity.
Yes, and I love how when he utilized the run-on sentence, right? The tendency for, and please excuse me, those of you who are writers, I know that might be an issue, but just recognizing how important it is sometimes, even with it not being perfect, but it being necessary in that moment for what it is. I really appreciated him realizing that and sharing that as an example. At least for me, I was like, I never thought about it that way. So
yeah, like the semicolon that people are using, right, to say I could have ended, but instead it kept going. It kind of gave me that idea, even though it was talking about run-on sentence. I was like, oh, that's okay. I see what you did there.
yes.
So, thank you, Rudy. So we're talking about village, but sometimes people can use the word village and community interchangeably. And so kind of just wanted to keep bringing it back to the idea of village building, because that's the theme of the prevention summit. And so, but when being a part of a village or being part of a community, it can have a positive effect on mental health and emotional well-being. This is according to Head to Health with Australia.gov, that community involvement kind of makes us feel that we are connected to other people and that we have a sense of belonging. And when you're in a new group of folks in a village and everybody's feeling like we're connected, we have a belonging, then maybe there's also a purpose that emerges so that we can like work toward, creating a better life for everybody in our village. And maybe that extends. And so now I'm working for everybody to have, kind of like we were talking about earlier at the beginning, equity, have access to resources, excuse me, and all of that. Because, without meaningful purpose and without belonging, we saw some of the, impacts of that social isolation. And so I also wanted to just kind of talk about a few kind of elements that affect our positive effect of mental health and village building. We have access to resources, we have advocacy, there's also mutual support. We talk about mutual aid. There's a big talk about mutual aid because of COVID. We were talking earlier that we have mutual aid that comes up when we're like, what am I gonna do? How am I gonna get help? And so then people come to each other's aid. Like those fridges, community fridge where people didn't have food. And I was like, what am I going to do? Oh, here, we're going to do this fridge together during this time because we don't have any other source, right? The state is not able to help us. So we're going to help ourselves. Or when I think about adding a little bit to my personal story, I had some issues with mental health when it came to cutting. And so my community we all got together and I told them this was happening. So we got together, we got rid of all of the impediments that could lead to more dangerous behaviors, that people were checking in on the hour. And so I could get into a residential facility and, people would stay overnight. And so it was like, hey, we don't know, we're not therapists. So we can't help you with that. But what we can do, we can make sure you have something to eat, make sure you're safe. We can make sure that people are around you. And so that kind of community, that matters, right? There was advocacy in there. There was mutual aid support. There was belonging. There was purpose because, they felt purpose being able to help and to support someone who's a part of their community who is having an extreme mental health challenge. And so while I was waiting for care, I got that kind of support. And so even while we're waiting for COVID to move to even better, like a better space with how we react to each other in community and live together. There are people who are doing things about it is the point. There are people who are deciding, okay, we're going to take care of each other in our small pocket while we're hoping that one day policy catches up or one day our nation will have an effort that is combined at helping the least of these, which then, ends up helping all of us. But until that day, we have to village build. With like mental health and other things on our mind. So healthy village building fosters connection with the following benefits. We talked about many of these just in the story and in looking at Head to Health. And so you start in the center, there's a positive sense of connection to nature and childhood, and experiences that create that environment where we are able to connect to our outside world, as well as being able to connect to the world where we're with each other. I think that is so connected because we forget that we live in an environment, like a real earth environment. So if I get lost in my computer or online, I forget that, oh, wait, there are ways that I can connect to nature that also help my connecting to other folks. And so when there's increases in connection, let's see, positive development, critical thinking, fewer psychological complaints, pro-social behavior. And then as we connect to nature and each other as adults, we have ability to get sustainable resources and environmental family values. There's just like when I was growing up here in South Carolina, the summers are so like hot, and you don't want to do anything or go anywhere or be with anyone. You just want to lay there with just feeling the way the air conditioning feels. But my grandmother would always be like, you got to go outside and go find somebody to play with, and y'all be outside and together. It just promoted so much. Whereas now that's not really the case as much. Now it's like, oh, well, here's a screen. And so there's so much isolation. You can use it for connection. I'm not saying that, some people like the internet is so terrible. It's what you make of it. But we have to think about it, I think, in terms of our mental health and how connection to nature also helps us connect with each other, which also helps us connect to mental health and to grow. I mean, sunlight is already proven. Vitamin D, you got to have it in your life. So I don't have to take a pill when I, can go outside.
Yes, Davlin, I just wanted to chime in because I know with regards to the pandemic, that's when social isolation increased even more in my life. And so it was very instrumental for me to be connected through technology with certain like podcasts. So there was one that's, I don't know if it's a podcast of what the name is, but it's called Girl Trek. And what it did for me was enable me once a day to connect. Like you can get on this phone call where women will be walking for 30 to 45 minutes. And so it was like we were hearing what they were saying and encouraging statements while walking. And then in some communities, what ended up happening, people started connecting with other women who were in their area who were also walking. So it was very beneficial to help that connection in a safer space because we're outside, but we're still connected to one another for the purposes of building our health, right, through walking. So that was another way in which I think had I not had that connection through technology, I probably wouldn't have known about it. So I think it's a combination, right, of utilizing it in a way that's going to be beneficial. So it's not either or, but both and, right? At least for me, that's what I found to be very, very helpful, especially during that time when we weren't really quite clear, didn't fully understand, COVID-19.
Yeah, I think you're right. I think a lot of people started to take notice of like how disconnected they were from the environment in general and started to go outside because it's like, what can I do today? Well, at least I can go outside to the park with the people I'm connected to, or at least I can maybe lots of people took up biking to be outside, and at least I can connect to the living environment. And the inside can be so, I guess people have plants inside, but you know what I mean? It can be so like restrictive and like, oh, there's nothing, where's the living? Where's the life? And so finding Girl Trek, being able to walk, which is also connected to nature, which is also connected to the people on the app. It's like, oh, I can have both. So I really appreciate that both. And I began to start to think about the land as ancestor during the pandemic. And so I'm constantly thinking about like what we can learn from the way the environment works. So nature, the way nature is working, shares, the way nature speaks to each other. It is, if one part's impacted, it's all impacted. And so those lessons aren't just like, oh, that's just for, indigenous practices back in the day. It doesn't matter now because we have logic. Like, yeah, they had logic too, first of all, but also there are things we can learn and move forward and bring into kind of the current way we relate to the environment and the way we relate to each other, which also has an impact on our mental health. Not 3 or 4, maybe a week, 2 weeks of no sun. How do you feel? No sunlight, or some people even have like seasonal affect disorder because there's no light. You can't get the light. And so I think that it all works together when we think about village building.
Yeah. So. Thank you so much, Dad, for, bringing that to light about the indigenous, what we can learn from indigenous communities, which is where we're leading to in our next slide. If you don't mind, please taking us there. Thank you. So looking at a historical context of resilience of village building, right? Indigenous communities have used village building to care for one another while waiting for therapeutic care due to the negative connotations around seeking therapy, the shortage of therapists and or culturally sensitive and competent clinicians. So that negative connotation can also be said about just having a negative stigma associated with seeking help outside of said village or outside of that community. So that has recognizing the impact of indigenous communities and recognizing that at one point, some of those communities weren't able to even gain access to some of the mental health services that the government may have had, right? So in addition to, being worried about the stigma associated with mental health services, but then we also have to remember historically, sometimes there were communities that were not afforded access to said resources in their own, land. So I'm really, I think it's important for us to pay attention to that as well, right? That apart from that, these communities already had a sense of how they can better take care of their own kind, their own needs, while they weren't being afforded the resources. Yes. And so some examples of village building we'd like to share with you. So enslaved West African tribes, taught family as clan. And this idea encouraged kinship building once new families of necessity were formed on plantations here in the United States of America, to be specific. Because as you know, historically speaking, when we look back, these people were stolen from Africa and then came here. And a lot of them came from different regions in Africa, right? Even though, but there were different tribes and they spoke different languages. And even then, they still had that mindset of we're a clan, right? This is a tribe, we're going to work and help one another. And so what would often happen is part of the structural system of enslavement required, separating parent from child. And so the father may be on one plantation, the mother's someplace else, and the child is someplace else. And so, communities would just be like, okay, some other enslaved mother figure would come into the play and be there to protect the enslaved child, or a father figure would be there to protect an enslaved child. And that was in the way in which kinship was developed and able to foster families outside of one's families of origin. And that's been very instrumental in enabling them to overcome and be resilient through the times of harsh enslavement. Another example are elders, right? Elders were are often consulted for their wisdom concerning mental, physical, emotional care and dealing with life transitions. So going to the elders who had more experience and knowledge than some of us did. And so that's another resource of village building. And then there are Black people who've often, in the Black community, Black people have often taken care of family members who've had mental health issues because of the collectivist nature of Black families and not wanting to use the state for care because, once again, as I stated earlier, sometimes those resources were not accessible due to racism. Were not accessible to such families. And a lot of immigrant families do this as well, as I've noticed in the work that I've done with immigrant families. A lot of Latinx communities are also very big on making sure to attend to the health of family members who may have mental health issues. And then another example we'd like to share is looking at the Southern Black Church. And it's not just the Southern Black Church, but for what we came up with regards to this webinar, a lot of the Southern Black churches were and continue to be a source of counseling through pastoral care, mentoring, and benevolence communities that support their members through moments of grief and illness, helping them to get access to resources for like rent, college scholarships. A lot of times they have they may have bake sales to raise funds for needs of its individual members. So these are different examples in which village building has been very instrumental in helping to provide support for members of the village who may not have necessarily had access to mental health resources. The other thing I wanted to share just real quick, sometimes too, if you go back to the last slide, I'm sorry, I meant to also share this as an example. If you think about the civil rights movement, at that time, some of the support that came in from the village was with regards to transportation. Like when you think about when they were trying to get equal rights in Montgomery with regards to the Montgomery bus boycott, the village came together to attend to the need for transportation, right? So that they wouldn't have to rely on the government's bus system, so that they would be able to get their equal rights, right? So that's something to pay attention to as well with regards to village building, and how sister circles or prayer meetings have been also very instrumental in helping people within that village, within that community, to better cope with some of the mental health issues that they may be experiencing as well. Thank you, Davlin.
You're so welcome. I just wanted to kind of highlight two other, in addition to kind of what you already shared, the LGBTQ plus community, especially when I think of specifically Black trans folks during COVID, really like not having the resources necessary to be able to get to places, to get vaccines, or to take care of themselves. There's lots of housing issues with housing discrimination and eviction moratoriums and having a place to stay. And so really saw the creation of so many kin building opportunities. You know, it's like the development of, for example, of House of Tulip in New Orleans. It's like, okay, well, we're going to create our own housing. We're going to get together. We're going to do mutual aid. We're going to buy this house. Then we have a place for folks to come and stay and get the resources they need and do all things with genetic marker kind of changing with birth certificates, all of that stuff. It's like, let's do this for us because the state is not going to help us and we need to be able to do it. The other thing is like, obviously during the 80s, 90s, AIDS epidemic, lots of folks who had HIV, AIDS, the campaign to kind of put everything on gay men or the lesbian community, like it's just a lot. It's like, why are you doing all this? And so with that negative kind of speaking, there's just nowhere for folks to go to get care. And so what happens when you get isolated and you're sick? Well, that definitely affects your mental health. And so also creating bonds of kinship across race, across ethnicity, across gender, socioeconomic status. It was like, hey, we got to take care of each other. And then allies came to also help alongside that. And so just to see that people said, we are the ones who keep us safe. We are the ones who have to help each other with our mental health. We're the ones who have to make sure we get to doctor's appointments and all of that. And then we also have to shift policy to say, no, this is not what's happening. It's actually not our fault. It's actually spreading everywhere. And so we need to do something to help each other. And so what happens to the least of these by whose standards? But anyway, what happens to the least of these happens to everyone.
Yes, thank you so much for illustrating those two examples, Davlin, because what we know with the initial response to the AIDS epidemic in our country, there was the negative, and unfortunately, there's still remnants of that negative stigma, right? And the identified group of individuals who are believed to be the primary individuals who were having AIDS were members of the LGBTQ plus community, right? Specifically gay men back then. And because of all that, a lot of effort that the members of the LGBTQ plus community, the medical community was able to do as well as allies, attending to their need, to the need of members here, was able to help provide, illuminate the need for everyone to have access to the medications that are available now, right? I mean, we've made such strong and great progress with regards to being able to, help reduce the likelihood of HIV status becoming AIDS, right? But that's because we were attending to the needs of those who were being marginalized, right? Who are considered the least of these, right? And so that's the importance, once again, that goes back to valuing. It didn't matter to me if it was a gay person or not a gay person. The fact is, we have this illness, we need to attend to it. But because we, in our society at that time, some of us felt like, oh, it's just them. So it really doesn't impact me. I'm not gay. It doesn't matter, or what have you. It's because we don't value one another enough, is what I think has played a significant impact on us at times, isolating certain groups of people and discriminating against them as well. Thank you, Davlin. So what are some of the common obstacles to village building? I think it's important for us to look at that as well for mental health. So one of them is superwoman syndrome. And this is a lot of women in our society may have experienced this. This is the perceived notion that as a woman, you need to be strong. You need to be able to be selfless and just take care of everyone else's needs to the detriment of your own, and then not sharing your emotions when you're having a difficult time, because you're the go-to person that people come to solve things. You're the mom, you're the teacher, you're the counselor, you know, you have to be, if you're a mom, excuse me, but you're that person that's supposed to make things better, right? You're supposed to just know because you're the woman. This is not realistic, nor is it sustainable, right? These type of things get into our way of asking other individuals to help us, because we're being held to this, or we're holding ourselves accountable to this unrealistic, unsustainable way of being, which is the superwoman syndrome, right? Another obstacle is the societal expectation for men to disconnect from their emotions, right? That also makes it difficult sometimes for people to, for men in particular, to feel that they should be able to ask for help, because they're supposed to be the problem solver. You're supposed to just make it work, right? This is what happens when we have these rigid gender roles and expectations. It makes it difficult for us to be able to grow and navigate challenges that require us to be flexible, right? When there's a lack of trust in the mental health system, that's also an obstacle. If I don't trust, you know, because of historical maltreatment by the medical health system or the educational system or what have you, anything that's remotely close to those mental health system is not going to be trusted. So that makes it difficult. Other common obstacles is the sense of urgency that it has to happen right now. Everything has to be fixed right now. And if it doesn't happen, then we don't need to address it. You know, that's also problematic. In addition to that, I'd like to share some common obstacles that's not listed on there that I thought about, which is our societal expectations for praise for being autonomous. You know, you did this by yourself. I need somebody who's a self-starter. I need somebody who is self-sufficient. I want somebody who is independent. Those things also, that mindset, right, makes it very challenging for someone who is known to be independent, self-starter, self-sufficient, autonomous, for that person to feel like they can go and ask for help, right? So we really want to be mindful of those things and how those can really make it difficult for us to access our village.
Thanks, Dom. Some kind of moving out of those obstacles, we wanted to also share some principles for village building for mental health. So what does it require to build a healthy village? We just have a few things listed here, but obviously the list is probably more exhaustive than these 6 things on building a healthy village for mental health. But first, effort and persistence. So this is continuous effort and continuous persistence over time. We all know the building, even if you just think about building friendships, you start with someone, you know each other, you know, not very well, you go out, you have coffee or tea, you have people over. That's only one meeting. Then it's maybe 2 weeks later, you have another coffee or whatever, at least the way it is with our culture. And so it takes effort and persistence and time. So we have to give to that. And then you have to decide, well, how vulnerable am I going to be? Am I going to share that I actually have needs? Are people going to know that I've had some, you know, mental health issues in the past, and that, you know, could they be a part of looking out for that and be a part of that in my growth? And can I be a part of that for their growth, or whatever, you know, areas they might have mental health? Do I have that in me? It's also challenging. There's lots and lots of challenges to building relationships because of conflict. Conflict is inevitable in all of our relationships. And so what value do I place on conflict? Am I like, nah, conflict, no matter what, I will never, ever engage in it. I'm just going to pretend like it doesn't exist and cut folks off. Ooh, that's not really good for your mental health or your village building. So, but can I rearrange my thinking? Can I think differently about conflict in order to, you know, challenge myself and be willing to see the challenge that conflict is, but challenge toward growth and toward community building and toward having the village that I really want to have. There's also, you know, mutual risk in that. I want you to risk, but I also want to risk. It's not about me just being vulnerable and throwing all of my vulnerable stuff on you and then be like, bye. Like, no, I gotta be kind of open to also experiencing that risk and that vulnerability from someone else. There's ultimately disappointment and hurt, right? Like conflict happens and there are hurt feelings and there's disappointment. And how do I recover from disappointment and hurt? What does it look like to practice forgiveness for self and others? What does it like to practice compassion and kindness right alongside disappointment and hurt? And then seek additional mental health resources when necessary. Are my friends and community and village going to be like, we've noticed these things and we're really going to support you. And it's also time for you to seek extra help. Is that a part of my village building for mental health? And people say, this is what we've seen and we really want you to get help. I think when we look at people doing interventions in the past, that's a kind of a model for what I'm talking about here, where people in your community kind of come together, maybe not in the way that people have been doing it that we've seen on TV, where you get surprised and there's a letter. I mean, where people know because you've been talking to about them. It's like random, or you get intervention one day. It's like people have been involved in your life, and so it's kind of an openness to give and receive feedback in the village.
Yeah, and I want to also share, Davlin, no village, even as inclusive as it may be, is just automatically, everybody just feels like they belong. It's really about relationship, building relationship and building trust and connection, and going back to that, showing up frequently, right? And so and recognizing that with that vulnerability, yeah, you're going to experience some disappointment and hurt because misunderstandings happen because we're human. That is going to happen. But I do want to share something from Dr. Gary Landreth. He's a world-renowned play therapist, and he talks about Cookies, Choices, and Kids. That's a book that he wrote for parents, and he talks about the importance of repair and connection. And the reason why children, one of the things that they're able to do really well, if parents help them to do this, is they're able, even when they're upset with you because you told them, no, they can't have this cookie, and you set a limit. They're able to come back and reconnect if you are open to repairing that process with them too. And so we can learn from doing that so that we can build our village. And then the other piece that I wanted to share also is, what that can look like sometimes for purposes of, I know something that my family did a great deal was respite. During the summertime, sometimes my mom would be stressed because she had a lot of responsibilities with sending support to family members back in Haiti. And my mom's cousin would say, well, why don't you just let Dominique come for, the 2 weeks? Let her come for 2 weeks and spend time with her cousins here. We're out here. And that made a difference to helping her to get some breathing room so she didn't have to worry about childcare and what have you. So respite comes in different ways. Sometimes there are mom groups, right? Where you have moms that you're really cool with, or dad groups that dads you're really cool with, and we can do things sometimes with all our kids simultaneously. So the load isn't as heavy. So that's one example. Sometimes there, like I said, chat groups that people have where they're able to talk about something in common that can help them to feel a little less heavy or overwhelmed. These are some things that can be very instrumental and helpful in helping people's mental health while they're waiting to access mental health services. It's just something I wanted to share, Davlin.
I appreciate that. When you talk about the respite, I think my family did really good with that. So because I spent lots of time with my grandmother, and grandmother had my cousins there, and so I would spend time with my nuclear family, my extended family, and also friends. And so it wasn't like a fortress family where it's just the four of us. That's all we got. We don't have anybody else. We got to just make it on our own. And I feel like that's the autonomous kind of part of life in the United States that's like a little bit off. It's like, no, you can't just depend. You cannot do it on your own, even on your own as a individual, like a fortress family. You need people. We all need each other. And so I think what that describes is take time for yourself, take time for your family, get yourself a break. You need a mental health break, and breathe it out. So breathe it out. We need courage. We need rest. We need each other all of the time, and especially this week. I think this is a current post from Octavia Rakim, who is definitely focused on us taking the time to rest and not burn ourselves out working at both ends or putting all of our value in our productivity. And so we need the courage to say, you know what, I'm going to take a break. I don't have to live at this, do this grind thing that has been elevated in our culture at the moment. And then to say, I'm not a machine. Actually, my body actually does need rest. And it is not something to highlight. Oh, I only get about 3 hours of sleep a night. That's all I need. Yeah. So perhaps not a doctor, but it's probably not good for the long term. And then we need each other. There's a poem by Gwendolyn Brooks. It's called Paul Robeson, about Paul Robeson. And at the end of it, she says, we are each other's harvest. We are each other's magnitude and bond. And that's what I think about when we need each other. We are the magnitude and bond for each other. We hold each other together. And then this time, at all times, especially this week, as we experience so much violence in our country at the moment, and it's always there, but it just feels super highlighted at the moment, and more than we have been experiencing in the past. And so we really, really need each other, especially when mental health is concerned. And so what do you do? What are we going to take away from this? We have a couple of things we'd like to highlight, but of course, we'd love to, hear at any time you want to share when we have our Q&A, what you're going to be taking away. But be open to ask trusted highlight there, trusted village members for what you need. If you need time because you got to get away as a working parent or a working guardian or working birthing person, I need some time. Or as someone who's single, maybe you need some time to connect. You're like, can I just spend some time with your kids? Because I just really want to, connect with other folks. Allow yourself and your communities to slow down. We don't have to do everything so fast, and rest. We were talking earlier about urgency, which is a characteristic of white supremacy. And it is the urgency that everything's got to be done right now, right now, right now, right now, right now. It can't be done right now, right now. Take a moment, and allow your community to take a moment too. And don't want to make my urgency your urgency. Be like, okay, well, I'm urgent about this, so we got to do it now. But when you need it, I'm like, meh, we can do it next week. Let's do that for each other. Then community care and self-care work in tandem. They're together. And so that's how, at least that's the way I view community care, is in the frame of self-care. They're together. They can't, for me, they don't operate separately. It's not just about going to get my nails done or going get a massage or even going on vacation. Those things are fine, but it's when I consider self-care, it's like taking care of myself so I can show up as a whole person. And so community that's the only way I can do that. I can't do complete self-care without community. And so what does it mean to do that for mental health? How do I make sure that my mental health is, keep an eye on it? I can't do that by myself because sometimes I don't even can't even see what's going on. People are like, you're being real irritable over the last couple of weeks. I'm like, really? Yeah, you hadn't had no time with people. You haven't been a patient, huh? And so then it's not at the point where you're like, oh, I'm having a crisis. It's like little by little, folks can let you know. And then log off and use the time for emotional processing with community members, for movement and activity, walking, and or creativity. Maybe you want to write some poems, you want to sing, you want to dance, you want to create some kind of collage, whatever it is, to put all those creative ideas onto paper. And then think about doing these things in community. You don't have to do it by yourself because you're taking time. I'm taking time for myself, so that means I got to be alone in solitude. No, it could mean that, but it doesn't have to. It could just mean a small group, trusted friend, do something big. We got to be aware of who we are and what we want, what makes us happy, what fulfills us, what creates margin within us, so that we have times when things happen like this, we have some margin built up because we're walking in mental health with our village.
Yes, thank you so much, Dad, for saying that. I think that's so important. I'm creating time for self, but then also noticing that I can create time for self in community. So for example, being part of a book club at a library, right? I can be part of that. And we could actually have time where we sit together and we read, silently. I'm still getting my, self-care for self, but I'm still in community with people, that energy, just having that connection. Or like this other thing, crochet. Right? I'm doing it by myself. However, I'm in a group with people also, or painting or drawing. So many different things, or walking. So yes, thank you for sharing those takeaways.
You're so welcome. These are our references. Just wanted to share some of the things that are because we've been doing this work for a long time, both therapy, social justice, And so you learn stuff along the way. But there are also things like the CDC and mentalhealth.gov and some articles that we read that also helped us prepare and shape some of the thinking. In addition to always the mother of our work, Audre Lorde, when I think about res momentum and the value of the breath, there's just all bell hooks and all about love. It's like I could literally bring all these people with me and be like, hey y'all, we are standing on the shoulders of all of the intellectual work these folks have done. So I don't want to pretend like I got all this by myself, because it did not happen by myself. And so
it can't happen by ourselves. We're taught that, but we can't. I'm so thankful that I don't have to do this myself.
Hey, yes, the word. So I don't know if you shared your tagline earlier. Did you? That Vadreen's Healing Services, impactful healing starts with facing your truths?
Oh, no, I didn't.
Oh, okay, well, there it is, y'all.
Thank you, Tamala. I appreciate that.
Welcome. So I'm going to stop the share now because we have completed our presentation, but we would love to have any questions that you might have to offer or any thoughts. And I'm going to give it to Kat.
Wonderful. Thank you so much for that amazing presentation. We do have a question. I just had to leave the room as the spoken word speaker's performance was rather anxiety triggering. I wish you had given us advance notice of this. I do want to mention that there was notice given at the beginning of the presentation. If you all want to address this as well, please do.
Yeah, that's what I said at the beginning of the poem, that it talked about depression and that you need to take care of yourself. That's the warning that we try to give about the content beforehand. I'm sorry that you missed that warning. There was a warning given.
Yes, and I am also sorry that you had that experience, but in the very beginning also I did say that sometimes there may be things, when we were talking about the community agreements and setting up the container, we talked about the importance of, in addition to being present and kind and open and sharing the space in an equitable way, I also mentioned the importance about this being a brave space and recognizing that there may be something that we say within the context of the presentation that could be triggering, and that because we don't know what those things are, we do ask and encourage people to do what they need to do to take care of themselves. So it is my hope that while that did happen, that sounds like you were able to go ahead and attend to your needs by stepping away.
Wonderful. Thank you both so much. Are there any other questions, or would anyone like to say anything about how much they enjoyed the presentation and what you received from the presentation? We'll take a minute. Jason says, thank you so much for the presentation. I think it is so important to attend to self-care. Could you expand more on that and community?
Go ahead, Davla, you can go ahead. Okay, so self-care, when I think about self-care, pop psychology talks about, going to get your nails done, getting your hair done, getting a massage. I do think that's important too, but I really think it has to do with you being intentional to do those things that are going to replenish you, or that's attending to how you're feeling. So being very conscientious of what it is that you need for yourself, right? And sometimes that could be, I need to set more boundaries around. So for me, ways in which I try to engage in self-care, it's continuously. So for me, it's about giving my best yes, right? So I try my best not to say yes to events that, or to, even if it's my kids, they're asking me, can you do this? Can you do this? And I want to, as a parent, to do certain things, but I'm limited. So being aware of my limitations is part of my self-care. Being intentional about taking time for me to just be. Living in a society that attaches what we do with our worth, it's really important for me to be intentional about recognizing just being. And so for me, just being is taking that time to just be and just be. Feel what I'm feeling, being mindful of that is, for me, an instrumental part of my self-care. And so when I'm able to attend to my needs and not stretch myself so much so, I'm less likely to become resentful because I'm running on empty, right? And so when I take time for me, I'm better able to connect with community and be fully present when I'm in community. So I'm not quite sure if that answers your question, but that's how I engage self-care for myself. Those are a few ways in which I do that. And then how I believe that that's connected to community care. I can better engage community when I'm coming from a place of replenishment than a place of resentment. Davlin?
I think when I think about self-care, I think of it in context of community care. So for me, one cannot exist without the other. For me, community helps me be able to take care of myself. And so how I mean that is, for example, with my job, folks are very kind of caring. And so as a person with disabilities, I can say, hey, right now I don't have it. I'm having a flare or whatever. And so they allow me to then say, okay, as self-care, you need to take care of yourself. What do you need to do that? And so then I can be like, okay, well, I need to take this off and not do this. And so that is self-care, but it's only able to happen because I'm living in community with those folks and letting them be aware of what's going on. And so I think when it becomes kind of commercialized and made its own thing, like this is the self-care portion of Walmart or the self-care portion, please use some bubbles. And it's like, okay, some bubbles are fine, but let's think about what is the purpose of the bubbles? Well, it's so that you can take some time and take care of yourself. And so how do I do that while engaging in community care and not running from community?
Wonderful. Thank you both. Jason responded and said, thank you. So true and can relate. All right, we'll take another moment to see if there's any more questions or insightful, thoughtful comments about the presentation. Please take one more minute to decide if you'd like to add anything to the Q&A box. All right. With that, I'd like to say thank you to our panelists for your wonderful presentation, and thank you to all of our viewers for joining us today. And please join us for all of our upcoming presentations. Please take care, stay safe, and have a wonderful day.